Great, thank you very much. I can see that looks like Councillor Richter is also here in the audience. Thank you for coming tonight. And I don't see any others that have acknowledged themselves, but if you have, maybe just send in the chat or something so we know you're here. But thank you for coming and being part of our evening tonight. I also do want to acknowledge that we have some members of our township staff that are with us. They're have put in a lot of hard work into this project, and I really want to thank them for their good work. 3 of them are on our panel here tonight, Mr. Chu, Mr. Fong, and Mr. Jensen. Thank you so much for your work on this project. I'm sure there's others as well, but I know the 3 of you are on the panel, and if there's any others that are in the audience, thank you for the work that you've done. The Community Forest Management Strategy has been prepared with the guidance of TPAC. And I'd like to now introduce for you Ms. Stewart, who's also on the panel here. She is the community chair of TPAC, and I'd like to give her an opportunity to introduce the members of TPAC, as well as to maybe say a few words on behalf of the committee.
Excellent. Thanks, Councillor Whitmarsh. Good evening, everyone. And as mentioned, the Community Forest Strategy has been prepared with the guidance of TPAC. The council-appointed committee is composed of the following people who have dedicated countless hours of their time to this strategy. And so on the screen here, you'll see everyone is here. And I know a number of these people are in attendance tonight, so I'd just like to recognize them. Christine Bishop, John Evanachko, Catherine Gray, Matt Muller, Al Neufeld, Hannah A. Sakure, and John Turner, and of course myself. So this group comes with very impressive credentials. We come from a variety of backgrounds. Every meeting I was blown away at the immense knowledge that was sitting around the table. But one thing we all collectively had was a real passion to protect our forests and everything that's in them. So with that, we're really excited tonight to share many, many months of work, and as I said, countless hours with you all this evening. And with that, I'll turn it back.
Great, thank you for that, Ms. Stewart. It was great working with the committee, and we certainly look forward to the feedback this evening. So without further ado, I'd like to get started, and so we'll let the members of our consulting team help to coordinate that. And I think, Amelia, I think you're going to start us off and give us the draft strategy, I think, to start us off. Is that correct?
Thank you, Councillor Whitmarsh. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And Kimmy, I think, is going to run through a couple of housekeeping items as well, and I'll briefly introduce myself. I'm Amelia Niederbar, the project manager for the Community Forest Management Strategy and a principal with Diamond Head Consulting. And also on our team, Trevor Cox, who wasn't able to join us tonight, and Elliot Bellis, who is here and available to provide technical support as needed. And I'll pass things over to Camille to just take you through some of the information you might need to participate this evening.
Great, thanks, Amelia. And yes, so just very quickly again, for folks who are joining us, Amelia, if you don't mind getting me to the next slide here, I wanted to point some ways that you can use the webinar functions during the presentation. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we will be starting with Amelia's presentation about the draft Community Forest Management Strategy, and we will then move into a question and answer period, which is where we're hoping to hear from you. So we will be answering those questions later on in the session. However, you are absolutely able and welcome to submit your questions as they come to you during the presentation using the functions that you will find at the bottom of your screen. So the ones that you see in the red circle here on the slide. We particularly encourage you to submit questions in the Q&A panel, although the chat is also available to you if you'd like. And I noticed that someone's already submitted a comment or question, so that is great. You're all welcome to add more to it, and we will be tracking those questions and asking them to our panelists after Amelia completes her presentation. As I mentioned previously as well, do note that we are available to try and help you sort any technical issues that you may encounter during this presentation. So you're welcome again to use the chat function, and particularly I would encourage you to write to my colleague Elliot Bellis on the panel to help you with any of your technical difficulties. And with that, I will pass it back over to Amelia so that she can take you through the presentation.
Thanks, Camille, and thank you all for joining us this evening and taking the time. We really do value and look forward to hearing your feedback on the draft. And thank you if you're joining us again after the first phase of engagement. We appreciate your returning. So just a couple of quick points of review here. Firstly, on what a community forest management strategy is planning to achieve. And really, one of the big outcomes of this is the establishment of a long-term community-supported vision for the township's community forest, and that vision really sets the tone and direction for community forest management moving forward. And achieving that vision is supported by a set of goals, which are then underpinned by strategies and actions for implementation. And alongside that, we've developed a set of indicators that staff can use to report back on success in relation to achieving the goals, which are based around planning, growing, protecting, managing, and engaging on the community forest. Our project has evolved over 4 main stages, and stages 1 and 2 were actually completed in an earlier phase of work that culminated in the community forest assessment report. And then in this phase of work, we've really shifted into the community engagement piece, and that's both public engagement, close engagement with TPAC and with staff to really develop a plan that reflects the township's needs and values. And so what is the community forest? We use, it's a fairly expansive term. Really, we're trying to, with that term, capture all of the different types of native forest ecosystems to urban and urban trees and heavily developed areas. So all of the forest ecosystems and trees and green infrastructure that supports the community forest across that range of different typologies. And so of course, that includes important forests around riparian areas and wetlands, but it also refers to the trees and forests within the agricultural land reserve, including the trees growing in streets, parks, and in private yards. So they're all components of the community forest, and the strategies developed to address each of those components. So in terms of our project phases, we have completed the development of the draft vision, goals and strategies and targets, and that was associated with the first phase of engagement. So we also met with TPAC several times during that phase. We had a public open house similar to this one, and an online survey and mapping tool that was open for the duration of that. And then once that closed, we moved into development of the draft. To inform that draft, we had workshops with staff, and again, we had a number of sessions and feedback from the TPAC committee as well. And then the draft and the engagement plan went to council, which has then led us here this evening to the second open house and an online survey that is launching and going to be open until mid-February. Once that engagement is complete, we'll make updates to that draft and then go back again to the members of TPAC and then ultimately to council, hopefully for adoption late winter. So for this evening, I'm going to make a fairly brief presentation so that we have ample time for questions and answers. I'm going to present the results of some of the highlights of the phase 1 community engagement, and then provide an overview of the community forest management strategy. And then I'll hand things back to Camille so that she can take you through how other ways you can provide feedback and the next steps for our project before she facilitates the Q&A period. So in terms of our initial engagement, what we were really seeking to hear from the community was an understanding of community priorities and values and vision preferences as it related to the community forest. So we asked in the survey a fairly broad range of questions, and I'll just provide some of those highlights this evening. And this is the slide that's up now is a question that we often ask in different communities, and we find it to be an informative sort of visual question that gives us a sense of the character that's preferred from survey respondents. And so we select a range of streets from the community that represent different typologies of street tree planting. And so in the township, most respondents indicated that their streets today look like these ones before you on the top here. So mixed spacing of mixed species of either large trees or medium-sized trees. And then sometimes, regularly spaced, more traditionally, I guess, planted streets of medium trees. And then we ask people then to say, what would they prefer their street to look like in the future based on those same images. And I would say that often in different communities, we have a very different result. But in the township's case, respondents really indicated that what they have today is really a character that they appreciate and most prefer in the future. So really the only difference in the preferred future outcome was that in terms of the regularly spaced trees, that they'd be large rather than medium trees. So I think that's a really positive indication for the township that people appreciate the community forest character that exists today, and that's something that people want to see maintained and perpetuated. We also ask people to select from a range of different types of benefits that are provided by community forests, to select those benefits that they considered most important. So they were across a broad range of categories, from ecological in terms of habitat provision, environmental in terms of things like climate regulation, and climate adaptation and mitigation in terms of carbon sequestration. But there were also questions on there around cultural benefits and spiritual benefits and economic benefits. But people consistently selected the ecological, environmental and climate adaptation and mitigation benefits as top values. And so that's really come through to help us inform again what's included in the strategy and how things are, the values that are communicated. We also developed a range of 3 vision statements for the public to provide input on. And we asked people to select the one they most preferred. And in this case, it was the vision statement that was most geared towards biodiversity and stewardship. So the statement that was included in the strategy really focuses on how the community forest can support biodiversity and connectivity of habitat across the township. Also that the community forest, as it grows and evolves, that it is healthy, that it's supported by healthy soils and natural forest ecosystems that are performing those vital ecosystem processes and providing that habitat to sustain the natural heritage and character of the township. Also important was that there be continued easy access to nature and recreation opportunities to improve health and well-being of residents who live in Langley. And that it be a community forest that is both locally and regionally recognised as a vital asset, and that also contributes and continues to function for maintaining connections to culture for Coast Salish people. And in addition to that, performing that function of maintaining a healthy natural environment that is going to help the community continue to mitigate and adapt to climate change. And then rounding that out was as the vision to have the whole community participate in and continue to benefit from stewardship of the community forest as a legacy that is going to be cherished by future generations.
Amelia, just a quick note here. There is a bit of background noise coming from you, and I'm not sure if it's from your headphones moving around, but perhaps just watch for that.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. I'll pull them out. We also asked people questions about the current state. So in this case, this question referred to asking people to provide an indication of their satisfaction with different levels of service related to specific services provided by the township. So that included public education, tree protection, risk management, pruning, pest and disease management, and tree planting. And that survey result indicated that the respondents in general showed some dissatisfaction around services provided for public education and tree protection. The majority of respondents were satisfied with pruning and services provided. And then there were sort of more mixed results related to risk management and pest and disease management and planting. And so from these results, we can use this as a baseline for looking at future changes over time and how those are improved with both implementation of the strategy and improved public education around the services that the township is performing related to community forest management. A mapping tool was also provided alongside the survey, so it was a separate tool. And we asked people there to highlight locations within the township that they really valued as urban forest places that they like to spend time. And then we also asked people to provide an indication of areas where they'd like to see improvement. And a lot of that improvement was focused on adding more tree planting and so on. So some of the places of value around the Tall Timbers Estates areas, Anderson Creek, and some of the hotspots for improvement were, I guess, around Yorkson Creek and Walnut Grove and Willoughby and so on, and the sort of the more urbanised areas. So that feedback, along with staff interviews and TPAC's input, led us into the development of the draft community forest management strategy. And developing that strategy encompassed a broad range of work. We're trying to bring in a broad range of issues and really tell the story of the community's forest. And so a big part of that is underpinned by that initial work that was done to assess the current baseline of how much canopy cover and what the quality of that canopy cover and quality of tree inventory was. And a key task for us was to set a canopy cover target that would really help drive the implementation of the strategy moving forward, and establish some metrics that staff can use to work towards and to report back on progress. The community assessment report had found that canopy cover in the township was at 30%. Looking at some of the neighbouring municipalities of Surrey and Abbotsford, which also have a mixed sort of farming and urban area, the township has good canopy cover in a sort of has a good level of canopy cover from a regional perspective. When looking at the canopy cover in the agricultural land reserve, it's actually fairly similar at 29%. And then canopy cover within the urban containment boundary is at 23%. So significantly lower than those other geographic areas of summary. And that was certainly an area of focus for us in the strategy, is that urban containment boundary area. So in exploring what a feasible and aspirational canopy cover target would be for the township, we took the existing community forest resource and looked at the different, essentially the makeup of the community forest in terms of its approximate age distribution and therefore whether it was likely to be growing or fairly stable. We also looked at the extent of planned development and attempted to estimate the likely change in canopy cover resulting from that future development. Then we took the existing policies that are in place and estimated then what that would do in terms of recovering that canopy post-development. And then we looked at the level of planting and the other types of programs that we could initiate as part of implementing the strategy, and what canopy cover target would be achievable. So for that urban containment boundary area, we have set a canopy cover target of 30%. So that's an increase from 23% to 30% by 2050. And that involves a significant level of effort, both on public and private land, to achieve that, and with also through the development process to ensuring that there's canopy recovery post-development. The canopy cover target set for the broader township overall is 31%. And so you'll note that's a relatively small change from present. However, the reason for that is that 75% of the township is within agricultural land reserve, and approximately another 15% is in rural lands. And so the impact that the strategy will have, and the fact that it's largely focused in the urban containment boundary area, means that our overall impact on township-wide is more modest. And in addition to that, the township has fairly limited influence over canopy cover in agricultural land reserve because of farming uses. And so it's a target, a township-wide target is somewhat, I guess, less informative compared to our urban containment boundary target, given the focus of the community forest management strategy. And I guess that is not to say that there isn't any effort being put into achieving canopy cover outside the urban containment boundary, just reflecting that there is less control over outcomes in that area. Another component of the strategy is looking across the range of challenges and opportunities that exist. And so this is really trying to capture what are the issues that the strategy needs to respond to now, what are the opportunities that are offered by those different issues, some of which are drivers, some of which are barriers. And so we've explored, I guess, the likely impacts and consequences of these range of issues. And then these have really driven the actions that the strategy is responding to. And so topics that I'm sure are top of mind for all of us: human-caused climate change, equity in terms of both distribution of tree canopy, but also in terms of access to services and where implementation of the strategy will be prioritised, biodiversity and the enhancement of that biodiversity, and restoration and connectivity, forest health, both due to current issues that we're seeing, as well as the anticipated challenges that are due to increase due to climate change and the impacts it will have on forest health. Development and urbanization as a part of our urban communities. This is something that is both a challenge but also a significant opportunity as our landscapes are transition into development, and the opportunities that are created with that development for canopy cover. Stewardship, being that the township has a really strong stewardship ethic, and how we can continue to foster and grow that to implement the strategy, particularly because so much of the work that could happen is on private land and on agricultural land. Reconciliation, and how the implementation of the strategy can continue to support reconciliation across the township. And then program levels of service. And so that is recognising both current challenges around delivering levels of service due to the demands on the program, but as well anticipating how level of service will change both through implementation of the strategy and as certain challenges related to drought and storms and so on increase the demand or the investment required in maintaining the community forest over time. So just to delve into some of those issues a little bit further, I'm sure that we all recall with some shock the heat dome event of this year. And that was a very significant heat event, and one that exceeded even the most extreme sort of, I guess, forecasts that had been made of potential future climate events. And hopefully we are not looking at heat domes becoming something that are more common in our region. However, we are looking at climate bringing consistently hotter summers, more extreme heat events on a more regular basis. In the recent events, there were 595 deaths attributed to extreme heat by the coroner. Those are preliminary figures. More information still coming in, but it was a very significant mortality event. And as the data emerges, we're anticipating that we're going to see concentrations of those deaths in areas where there are higher proportions of vulnerable older people. Indeed, the majority of people that died were 65 years or older. And likely there are issues around equity in terms of people living in poverty, social issues around people who are more isolated. And those types of vulnerabilities are quite significant and are going to need to be examined in terms of improving community resilience to these heat events. There's a very strong correlation between tree canopy cover and pervious surfaces and temperature. There is an effect that many of you probably heard of called the urban heat island effect, where areas of high impermeability, lots of hard surfaces, absorb heat throughout the day and then gradually release that heat through the night. And that effect results in urban areas being warmer by several degrees compared to surrounding rural areas. So mitigating that urban heat island effect is one of the big focuses of urban forest management in general, and certainly something that the community forest management strategy is seeking to achieve. Research suggests that blocks with canopy cover of 40% or greater have significant reductions in by degrees reductions on extremely hot days. And so information like that can really help to inform where we target tree planting to try to bring those canopy cover levels up. In addition to community vulnerability, these extreme heat events and indeed the increasingly warm summers are projected to create conditions that are going to stress the forest in terms of available moisture. And we're already seeing these impacts. Western red cedar decline has been progressing across the region, but it's not only Western red cedar, it's also Western hemlock, it's also big leaf maple. Birch has long been impacted by birch borer. So there's a number of important native species that are at risk presently. And these impacts are happening a lot quicker than we anticipated. Our firm was involved about 5 years ago in developing climate adaptation guidelines for the urban forest in Metro Vancouver. And at that time, we were looking at species vulnerability and we were talking about, Western red cedar, for example. But we weren't at that time anticipating that just a few years later, we'd be seeing this mass mortality starting to occur. So it's here now, and it's something that our communities are going to have to respond to, and our community forest programs are going to have to respond to in the coming years. Extreme rainfall events, really 2021 had it all. So again, our atmospheric river events have been forecast to become more frequent and more intense, and we are seeing that. And I think again, the recent event exceeded my expectations for what could happen as a result of those atmospheric rivers. So again, what community forest management strategies, but also climate adaptation strategies, park management strategies are all looking at ways we can adapt our landscapes and our natural assets to help mitigate these types of impacts. And the example here is the idea of having more hybrid landscapes that can function as rainwater detention during these extreme events, but the rest of the time are also available, for example, as recreational areas. Protecting and restoring biodiversity is certainly an important theme across the township. Many of our natural ecosystems have become fragmented either by development or by agriculture. The township has a lot of sensitive ecosystem areas, many of which are in parks, but also many of which are in agricultural land reserve or as riparian areas running through developed areas. Already, the township has some policies in place, such as ecological greenways and greenway amenities to try to ensure that habitat areas are being restored and connected as areas develop. But there are additional and broader opportunities that can be supported both through the community forest management strategy, and the strategy has also recommended the development of a biodiversity conservation strategy that would be able to target the approach that will be taken by the township more specifically. Enhancing forest health is going to be a significant priority, particularly as native species start to decline in health for a variety of reasons. Some of the best ways that we can respond to that are trying to maintain intact natural forest areas so that they can continue to function and have healthy natural processes occurring that will enable them to both maintain health but also resilience as they are challenged. And then for urban trees, providing adequate soil volumes and good growing conditions are really essential so that the trees are able to build up a good reserve of stored energy, and then when they have those difficult years, they'll be more resilient to be able to recover and continue to thrive. Managing development and urbanization, and as I mentioned, it's an inherent part of any municipality, and it does often involve removal of existing trees. It can be very difficult, for example, to retain individuals that grew up in a forest and build homes in and around those trees because of the nature of those trees and how they've grown up, and their inability typically to remain firm or survive once surrounding forest is removed. However, there's also then opportunities to ensure that we're providing good planting areas post-development so that there can be compensation for canopy loss. And these examples here do show some of that conversion in areas that were either developed and didn't have canopy, but we've seen, over the years that canopy has had some recovery. We can start to map the outcomes, and so looking at the effectiveness of the strategies and actions that have been proposed and whether they're achieving this canopy recovery that we're planning for. And as well, acknowledging that where the private land isn't going to be able to provide that canopy cover, we need to have a really good public realm tree canopy with street, park and greenway tree planting that's going to provide that nearby canopy cover. So the goals established for the strategy are: plan for a more connected and climate resilient network of trees and natural assets, grow the community forest equitably and sustainably by planting more trees, protect the community forest to retain more trees and natural assets during development, manage trees to maintain a safer and healthier community forest, and engage citizens to increase participation in community forest stewardship. And I'll just go through the strategies that underpin these goals. So for plan, that strategy is to establish canopy cover targets in policy. And we've looked at a range of recommendations and actions to embed that throughout different levels of policy document. Another strategy is to share accountability and success for community forest management across the township organisation. So that's really referring to across departments, so that there are some shared goals that will help to implement the strategy, not just focused in one particular department, but across all departments. The need to integrate green infrastructure into corporate asset management, and that's so that trees and other types of green infrastructure are appropriately budgeted for over time and planned for, just like other city assets. And then finally, to develop a biodiversity conservation strategy. For plant, the strategy is focused on prioritising tree planting equitably for climate mitigation and adaptation, on planting more robust trees, so climate adapted trees, to meet community forest canopy cover targets, and to improve planting site construction standards for streetscapes and development. so that those trees are being planted into areas where they're going to be able to thrive and live long lives, providing the benefits that we're seeking. In terms of protection, the strategies are to strengthen tree protection and replacement standards through the development process, and to retain significant trees and natural assets successfully during development, so that we're not just saying that they'll be retained, but we're putting in place the mechanisms to ensure that the outcome that those trees are going to continue to thrive post disturbance. For management, the focus is on establishing and funding adequate levels of service for community forest management, on proactively improving tree population resilience and climate hazard response planning, and on developing tree risk management policy and procedures. And finally, for engagement, the strategies are focused on developing and implementing a communications and stewardship plan to really guide how that engagement can evolve over time, on partnering broadly on community forest strategy implementation. So that's looking at partnering broadly across the organisation and external to the organisation. And then on providing incentives to encourage tree planting and tree care on private land. And then to support the implementation of the strategy, a number of targets have been established, and these are intended to be used again as indicators of progress as implementation proceeds. So of course, the canopy cover targets are a key part of that. We've recommended a measurement frequency of 5 years, as that's it's approximate, but essentially as LiDAR is available, that can be remeasured, or if the province doesn't do LiDAR again, then that could be something considered by the township. As well, we've incorporated a tree equity score, and we've recommended that census dissemination areas be targeted to be all brought up to the approximate average for the rest of the township, to try to address some of the differences between different census dissemination areas and the canopy cover that exists today. For urban trees, trees that are managed by the township, we have recommended a diversity target there of no more than 5% of any species, 10% of any genus, and 15% of any family. That is a rule of thumb that is broadly adopted to guide cities in ensuring that they have an adequately diverse tree population, so that if there is an insect or disease that targets one type of tree, we're not losing a huge proportion of the tree canopy, but just a subset. And then as well, we've set targets for tree pruning. That's really just to ensure there is a regular maintenance sort of inspection done, and trees are pruned if needed in those cycles. Also young tree pruning, which is really important for young trees to be pruned early in their lives, because it's an opportunity to correct defects when they're young. So if young tree pruning can occur, those trees are then in really good shape to grow and mature with fewer problems. Whereas if those problems are not addressed when the trees are young, by the time those trees are mature, that defect is a very large branch, and cutting it would create a very large wound, or that tree will be more vulnerable to storm damage. So having good maintenance of young trees is really critical to this outcome. As well, we've set a target for maintaining a planting site vacancy rate of less than 5%, and for township tree replacement at 1:1 annually. So that's really just to ensure that there is consistent renewal, and that opportunities that exist are being planted, and that's being monitored regularly. For natural areas, we've set a target to restore 1 hectare of habitat on township property each year, and to inspect tree risk along trails annually. And then for customer service, referring back to that survey response that I presented earlier, we've recommended that survey be repeated periodically to measure hopefully progress towards having levels of satisfaction at 50% or greater on those levels of service. And then finally, to respond to and classify service requests within 5 business days. So that's really a bird's eye view of the strategy, and I'll pass things back to you, Camille, at this point to to share how else people can provide their feedback and next steps. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Amelia. And I would also just might want to point out as well, I believe that you mentioned at some point in the presentation the 20-year vision, and in fact, the plan is referring to a 30-year vision for the implementation of the plan. So just mentioning that for anyone who may have noticed, and if you don't mind getting me to the next slide here, I will just give an overview again for people of ways you can provide your inputs in this process, aside from the discussion that we'll have this evening. So certainly we do encourage you to visit the project page. You have the website just indicated on the slide here, and that's something that we can share in the chat certainly after the presentation. This project page is a great resource. You'll find a lot of information and summaries from our previous phase of engagement, as well as links to anything ongoing and information for anything ongoing for this stage of engagement on the draft community forest management strategy, and of course the draft strategy document itself. So certainly do encourage you to go and visit this website to find out all of the information. And then Amelia, if you get me to the next slide, the other big thing that I do want to get everyone aware of and hopefully encourage everyone to take the time to fill out is our online survey. It's a survey that should take you about 15 minutes to complete. It is about the draft community forest management strategy, and it will be available from today all the way until February 18th, so for a full month. And we certainly do hope that everyone joining us in the room will take time to fill that out, as well as share it widely with your friends and neighbors. And the goal of this survey is to get generally your input and comments on the draft strategy, and particularly to understand better how you would like the township to prioritize some of the goals and strategies that Amelia was talking about in terms of their implementation. So certainly do strongly encourage you to visit the project page and to find the link to this survey that, as I was mentioning, is available as of today and will be for the next month. So please, if you do have a few more minutes of your time that you're able to give us for this project, strongly encourage you to go and fill out the survey. I should also note that it is our plan to post a recording of this video on that same project page so that it is available for you if you missed any part that you would like to watch, or if you would like to share it with people who couldn't attend this evening. And if you can get me to the next slide there, Amelia, perfect. Our next steps in terms of this project, certainly once we have the results from those survey, we'll be reviewing that and going to council with the draft community forest management strategy and making changes to reflect that engagement, those engagement findings. Certainly before we can get to a point where we finalize that strategy to account for all of this input and make sure that we can get a final strategy adopted in front of council